The guests were laughing, plates clinking, the aroma of food filling the room, but she wasn't allowed to sit. Her daughter-in-law pointed to the floor and said, "You can eat there." Everyone saw it, even her son. Yet no one spoke. For years she stayed silent, feeding the same people who once called her family. But that night, that single night, when the lights dimmed and truth knocked on their door, the woman they thought was weak reminded them what real strength looks like. My name is Eleanor Hayes, and I am 72 years old. There are days when I wake up and almost forget that my life used to be loud, filled with laughter, arguments, the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings, and the sound of my husband singing off-key while shaving. Now the house greets me with silence so heavy it almost feels alive. I can hear the tick of the clock on the kitchen wall. I can hear the radiator hiss. I can hear myself breathe. Silence like that, after decades of noise, does something strange to a person. It makes memories sound louder than they should. This house in Maplewood, a quiet suburb of Illinois, has been mine for nearly 40 years. I still remember the day Michael and I bought it. He stood in the middle of the empty living room, looked up at the ceiling fan and said, "This will be the house our grandchildren will run through." I laughed at him then. We were both in our 30s, still paying off student loans, but he said it with such conviction that I believed him. And he was right, at least for a while. Life gave us 2 children, Anna and Daniel. Anna was my sunshine, always smiling, always the peacemaker. Daniel, on the other hand, was fire and thunder rolled into one. Stubborn, passionate, restless. When he was 15, he told me he would never live a life like his father's. 9 to 5, mowing lawns on weekends, saving coupons. "I want to make something of myself," he said. And I told him, "You already have, Danny. You were born." It's funny how we remember these little things. The sentences that seemed meaningless at the time, but later come back to haunt or comfort you, depending on the day. Michael died 12 years ago. A heart attack. Sudden. Quick. One moment he was in the garden pruning the roses. The next moment he was gone. I remember the smell of the soil. The sight of the garden gloves still on his hands when they brought him inside. Grief is not loud like they say. It's quiet. It's the sound of the back door opening and realizing no one's there to walk through it. Daniel came for the funeral, but didn't stay long. He had business matters, as he put it. Anna tried to stay with me, but she had a family of her own. 2 kids, a husband who worked long hours. I told her I was fine. I wasn't, but mothers don't say those things. For the next few years, I learned to live alone. I learned how to fix the sink, how to mow the lawn, how to eat dinner with only one plate set at the table. I found comfort in small routines. Watering the plants at sunrise, knitting scarves for the local church charity, baking bread on Sundays even if there was no one to eat it but me. Then, about 8 months ago, Daniel called. His voice sounded different, tired, heavy. He told me he had been going through a rough patch. His business had gone under. He and his wife, Clara, were looking for a place to stay, just for a few weeks. Of course, I said yes. What mother wouldn't? The morning they arrived, I baked apple pie. I even brought down the good china, the white porcelain set with gold trim that Michael and I had received as a wedding gift. The house looked alive again. I polished the banisters, vacuumed the rugs, opened the curtains wide so the light could flood in. When their car pulled into the driveway, I felt a rush of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Daniel stepped out first, tall and lean but somehow smaller than I remembered. His eyes carried the weight of failure, though he tried to hide it with a forced smile. Clara followed, wearing sunglasses even though it was cloudy. She hugged me quickly, her perfume sharp and unfamiliar. Then came their daughter, Emily, my granddaughter, 16 years old, dressed in black from head to toe, her face buried in her phone. "Home, sweet home," Daniel said with a half laugh as he carried their suitcases inside. For the first few days, everything felt like a dream. I cooked breakfast, we ate together, and for the first time in years, the kitchen was filled with conversation. I told myself maybe this was a blessing in disguise. Maybe God was giving me a second chance at family. But the warmth didn't last. Clara began rearranging things almost immediately. At first it was small. She moved the vases from the mantel, saying they made the living room look dated. She replaced my floral curtains with plain, white ones she'd brought in a box labeled Home, Essentials. Then she started, talking about how we should paint the house. We should declutter the attic. We should remodel the kitchen. I wanted to believe she meant well, but the word "we" began to sound like an invasion. One evening, while we were having dinner, chicken stew, just the way Daniel liked it as a boy, Clara put down her spoon and looked at me across the table. "Eleanor," she said in that smooth, managerial voice of hers, "I've been thinking. This house is far too big for you. Even with us here, it's too much space. Don't you think it would make sense to sell it? We could get something smaller, more modern." I froze. Daniel didn't look up. He just kept eating. "This house," I said quietly, "is my home. Michael built this for us. Every brick, every corner. It's our story." Clara smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "Of course I understand that. But sentiment doesn't pay property taxes." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window looking out at the garden. The wind moved through the trees the way Michael's hands used to move through my hair. I whispered his name. I told him I missed him. And for the first time in years, I cried. Days turned into weeks. Clara began taking over everything. The grocery shopping, the mail, even my phone calls. She'd answer my friends saying I was resting. Resting from what? I wondered. I was beginning to feel like a guest in my own home. One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone. She was talking to someone about putting the property in Daniel's name for tax purposes. My heart nearly stopped. I didn't confront her then. I just listened, every word carving itself into my mind. Later that evening, while Daniel and Clara were out, I went to my bedroom and opened the small wooden box in my nightstand. Inside were old photographs, Michael's wedding ring, and a business card from Helen Brooks, an attorney I'd met at the community center years ago. I remembered our conversation clearly. I had told her about a friend who lost her house after her daughter convinced her to sign some papers she didn't understand. Helen had said something that stuck with me. "Always protect your peace, Eleanor. Even from the people you love." I found myself dialing her number before I even realized it. Her voice was the same, steady, kind. "Eleanor," she said after I explained everything, "I want you to come see me tomorrow. We'll make sure you're protected." That night, when I went downstairs to lock the door, I noticed Clara had moved my framed wedding photo from the hallway. It wasn't broken or damaged, just gone. I found it later in a drawer, face down, as if hidden deliberately. I put it back where it belonged. The next morning, I told Clara I was going out for groceries. She didn't ask questions. I met Helen at her office downtown. She looked over my documents, my deed, my will. Then she nodded slowly. "You're still the sole owner," she said, "but it's good you came now. We can set up a living trust. That way, no one can sell or transfer the property without your consent." I felt something lift inside me, something like air filling lungs that had been empty for too long. When I returned home that afternoon, Clara was in the kitchen, reorganizing my spice rack. "Where have you been?" she asked casually, not looking up. "Out," I said. She smiled again, that same polite smile that never reached her eyes. "Good. I was starting to think you were hiding something." I didn't answer. I just went to my room and closed the door. The next day, Daniel came to me. He looked worn down, his hands trembling slightly. "Mom," he said, "I need to ask you something." I could tell by the tone that it wasn't small. "Clara and we've been trying to get a loan to start over, but the bank needs collateral. If we could use the house just temporarily, it would help us a lot. Once things get better, we'll refinance and put everything back." I looked at my son, my boy, the same boy who used to run barefoot through the garden with grass stains on his knees. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to fix everything like mothers do, but something inside me, the same quiet strength that had been growing ever since Clara first moved that photo, spoke louder. "I can't do that, Daniel." He frowned, confused. "Can't or won't?" "Both," I said softly. He sighed, rubbing his temples. You don't understand. We're drowning here. You have everything. This house. Savings. Everything I have, I interrupted, was built with your father's hands and my years of work. It's not just bricks and money. It's what's left of us. He didn't answer. He just walked out. That evening, Clara barely looked at me. Emily ignored me entirely. The silence at dinner was heavier than ever. I tried to tell myself I'd done the right thing. But when I went to bed, I could hear them arguing downstairs, muffled voices, angry tones. My name was mentioned more than once. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of banging in the kitchen. When I went downstairs, Clara was slamming drawers. Daniel sat at the table, staring at his coffee. What's going on? I asked. Clara turned, eyes sharp as knives. What's going on is that we're trying to save this family while you sit there pretending this house is some kind of shrine. I stayed quiet. You think we want to be here? She continued. You think we enjoy living in this museum? We're doing you a favor, Eleanor. Daniel muttered. Clara, stop. No, she snapped. She needs to hear it. Then she looked straight at me. If you can't help us, at least stay out of the way. I looked at her, really looked. The woman standing in front of me wasn't just angry. She was desperate, scared. But cruelty always finds a home in desperation. Something in me hardened. Not anger, not hatred, just clarity. I turned slowly, picked up the phone on the counter, and dialed Helen's number. When she answered, I said only 5 words. It's time. Begin the process. The rest of that morning passed like a fog. Clara didn't speak to me. Daniel left early, saying he needed to clear his head. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the kitchen window, watching the sparrows hop along the fence. The garden had always been my peace. Michael used to joke that I spoke to the flowers more than I spoke to him. Maybe I did. Flowers don't interrupt. They just listen. Around noon, the phone rang. It was Helen. It's in motion, she said. Everything we discussed will be filed today. You'll have full legal protection within 48 hours. Thank you, Helen, I replied. She hesitated for a moment, then added, Eleanor, I know this is hard, but you're doing the right thing. When I hung up, I sat for a long time in silence. The weight of her words pressed down on me. The right thing? It didn't feel like it. It felt like betrayal, even though I knew I was the one being betrayed. That night, Daniel didn't come home until late. Clara stayed up waiting, pacing the living room like a cat waiting to pounce. When he finally walked in, they went into the den and closed the door. I could hear their voices through the thin walls. Anger, blame, desperation. My name surfaced again and again. I went to bed, but I didn't sleep. My heart ached for my son, for the boy who used to bring me wildflowers from the field behind our old house, for the teenager who used to slam doors and then come back 5 minutes later to apologize, for the man who now couldn't see that I was still on his side. The next morning, I woke up early and made pancakes, Daniel's favorite. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could start over, but when I came downstairs, Clara was already at the table with a cup of coffee and her phone in hand. She looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. You were up early, she said. I couldn't sleep, I replied. Thought I'd make breakfast. She gave a small laugh. That's sweet, Eleanor, but Daniel and I are going out. We have meetings to attend. Meetings? Business opportunities, she said vaguely. Then, after a pause, we'll be gone most of the day. The way she said we made it clear I wasn't included. When they left, I found myself wandering through the house like a ghost. The living room looked different now. Clara had replaced my family portraits with abstract art prints. Even the smell of the house had changed, replaced by her perfume, too floral, too artificial. I found Emily upstairs in her room, sitting cross-legged on the bed, headphones in, eyes fixed on her screen. She didn't notice me at first. When she finally looked up, she pulled out one earbud. Grandma? Hi, sweetheart, I said softly. Mind if I sit? She shrugged. Sure. Her room looked like a stranger's space. Posters of bands I didn't know, LED lights on the ceiling, clothes piled on the floor. "Are you doing okay?" I asked. She hesitated. "Yeah, I guess." Then, after a moment, "Mom and Dad fight a lot." My heart tightened. "I know," I said gently, "but they love you." She didn't answer. Instead, she looked down at her hands. "I like it here," she said quietly. "It's peaceful. Not like the apartment we had before. There was always yelling there." "Then you can always come here, sweetheart. You'll always have a home with me." She gave me a small smile, the first real smile I'd seen from her since they arrived. "Thanks, Grandma." When I left her room, I felt a strange warmth in my chest. Maybe not everything was lost. By afternoon, the house had settled into its usual silence. I made myself lunch, then sat in the living room reading an old gardening magazine. That's when the doorbell rang. It was Helen, holding a folder and wearing her usual calm smile. "May I come in?" she asked. Of course. We sat at the kitchen table. She opened the folder and laid out several papers. "These are the documents we discussed," she said. "The trust has been created. From now on, the house belongs to the Hayes Living Trust. You're the sole trustee. That means you have full authority over who stays here and under what conditions." I looked at the papers, my hands trembling slightly. My name was written in neat black ink, so official, so final. "I've also prepared an addendum," Helen continued. "In case anyone tries to claim ownership or force a sale, the property automatically transfers to a charitable foundation. That way, you'll never lose your home no matter what." "Thank you," I whispered. "You don't know what this means to me?" She smiled gently. "Actually, I do. I've seen too many stories like yours, Eleanor. You're stronger than you think." After she left, I sat there for a long while, staring at the papers. It felt surreal. I wasn't just protecting a house. I was reclaiming my life. Daniel and Clara came home around 7. They looked tired and frustrated. I had dinner ready, roast chicken with herbs from my garden. As we sat down, the tension was thick. Daniel barely touched his food. Clara kept glancing at her phone. Finally, she said, "Eleanor, we need to talk." I set down my fork. "All right." "We've been trying to get approved for a business loan," she began. "But it's complicated. We need some kind of collateral. The house—" "No," I said softly but firmly. Daniel looked up, startled. "Mom," I said no, I repeated. Clara's voice sharpened. "You don't understand what's at stake here." "I understand perfectly," I replied. "And I've already taken steps to make sure this home stays protected." "What steps?" she demanded. "The legal kind." For a moment, the room went silent. Then Daniel pushed back his chair, his face pale. "Mom, what did you do?" "I made sure this house can't be sold or mortgaged without my consent," I said calmly. "It's secure now. That's all you need to know." Clara's expression turned cold. "So you don't trust us?" I met her eyes. "Should I?" She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping the floor. "This is unbelievable," she muttered. "You'd rather trust some lawyer than your own family." "I trusted family once," I said quietly. That's why I had to call her. Daniel looked torn, caught between loyalty and shame. "Mom, we're not trying to hurt you." "I know," I said softly. "You're just trying to save yourselves, but not at the cost of everything your father and I built." He didn't respond. Clara stormed out of the room. The slam of the door echoed through the house. The next morning, I woke to an eerie silence. Daniel and Clara's bedroom door was closed. Emily's was slightly open. I went downstairs to make coffee, but when I opened the fridge, I froze. The food was gone, everything. The milk, the eggs, even the leftovers. The shelves were empty. I heard footsteps behind me. It was Emily. "Mom and Dad left early," she said quietly. "They said they're staying with a friend for a few days." "Did they say anything else?" She shook her head. "Just that they needed space." I nodded slowly. "That's probably for the best." She hesitated, then asked, "Can I stay here with you?" I smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. Of course you can. That night, the house felt lighter somehow. Emily and I made dinner together, spaghetti with homemade sauce. We ate in the dining room, laughing about how I kept spilling flour when rolling the dough. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. But peace never lasts long in stories like mine. 3 days later, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Clara was standing there with a man in a dark suit. She didn't even say hello. "This is Mr. Levine," she said curtly. "Our attorney." He handed me an envelope. "Mrs. Hayes, this is a formal notice. Your son and daughter-in-law are contesting the trust you recently established." I took the envelope, my fingers cold. "On what grounds?" He gave a practiced smile. "They believe you were coerced, that someone took advantage of your age and mental state." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then I laughed, a quiet, tired laugh. "Is that what they told you?" "It's just a standard procedure," he replied. "Tell them," I said calmly, "to bring their best evidence. And tell them I'll see them in court if they wish." Clara's eyes widened, as if she didn't recognize me. "You're not the same woman you were a month ago," she said. "No," I replied, closing the door. I finally remembered who I am. When I turned around, Emily was standing at the top of the stairs. She had heard everything. "Grandma," she said softly, "are they really suing you?" I nodded. "Do you hate them now?" I looked up at her. "No, sweetheart. I don't hate them. I just finally stopped letting them hurt me." That night, after Emily went to bed, I sat by the window again. The moonlight spilled across the garden, illuminating the roses Michael had planted decades ago. I whispered his name as I always did, and then said something new. "I think you'd be proud of me, Michael." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The days that followed were quiet in the strangest way, the kind of quiet that hides storms beneath it. I kept watering the garden, baking bread, keeping everything exactly as it had always been. But I knew the stillness was only the pause before something broke. Helen came by again the following Monday, a thin folder tucked under her arm. "They've officially filed," she said. "Petition to contest the trust. We'll respond within 10 days. I nodded, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea. "And the court date?" "Preliminary hearing in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Long enough for fear to fester, short enough for truth to still sting." Helen reached across the table. "Eleanor, they'll say things you won't like hearing. They'll question your judgment, your health, even your memory. You need to be prepared." I smiled faintly. "They've been questioning me for years." "Helen, I'm already prepared." That night, after Helen left, I sat by the fireplace with Emily. She was doing her homework, headphones hanging around her neck. "Grandma," she said without looking up. "Dad texted me. He said you're making things harder than they need to be." My chest tightened. "And what did you say?" She looked at me then, her voice steady. "I said you're doing what's right." I didn't answer. Instead, I reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Thank you, sweetheart." She shrugged, pretending it didn't matter. But I saw it in her eyes, the quiet understanding, the kind that only children who grow up too fast can have. The next morning, I found an envelope slid under the front door. No stamp, no address, just my name, in Daniel's handwriting. Inside was a single page. "Mom, I don't want this to turn into something ugly. We just need to talk. Clara is under a lot of pressure, and so am I. Please, don't make us go through with this. Let's find another way. Daniel." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer beside Michael's watch. Then I picked up the phone and called Helen. "Should I meet him?" I asked. "Only if you're ready," she said, "and only in a public place." I chose the cafe near the courthouse, the one with faded yellow umbrellas and old jazz playing through tinny speakers. Daniel arrived late, looking thinner than I remembered. The boyish charm he'd always had was gone, replaced by something colder. Exhaustion, perhaps, or guilt. "Mom," he said, sliding into the seat opposite me. You look well. I've been better, I replied. He sighed. I never wanted this. You know that, right? Then stop it, I said softly. I can't. Clara is not the law, Daniel. He rubbed his temples. You don't understand. We're drowning. The business failed, the bank's calling, and Clara's father. I interrupted gently. And you thought my house was your lifeboat? He winced. It's not like that. It's exactly like that, I said. And the saddest part is, you still think I don't see it. He leaned forward, desperation cracking through his voice. You think this trust fixes everything? It doesn't. It just destroys what's left of our family. No, I said. What destroys families is greed dressed as love. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he stood up, pushing the chair back roughly. You've changed, he muttered. I finally started living with open eyes, I replied. He left without saying goodbye. I sat there for several minutes, letting the noise of the cafe wash over me, cups clinking, laughter from strangers, life going on, indifferent. That evening, I found Emily sitting on the porch steps, hugging her knees. The sky was painted with streaks of violet and orange. Your dad came by? She asked. I nodded. Did he yell? No, not this time. She was quiet for a while, then said softly, He's scared. Mom, too. They don't know how to fix things. I looked at her, this child caught between generations of mistakes, and said, Sometimes people break what they can't control. It makes them feel powerful. She didn't respond, just leaned her head against my shoulder. We watched the sun disappear behind the trees. A week later, Helen called again. They've hired a private investigator, she said. For what? To prove you were mentally unfit when you signed the trust. They'll look into your medical records, your finances, even your personal relationships. They're trying to paint a picture. I almost laughed. Let them paint whatever they want. I'm not the one who should be afraid of truth. Still, that night, sleep wouldn't come. I walked through the dark house, past the family photos, the grandfather clock, the faint scent of lavender from the linen closet. Everywhere I looked was memory, some bright, some bruised. In the hallway, I paused before the portrait of Michael in his army uniform. They think I'm weak, I whispered, but they've forgotten whose wife I was. The day of the hearing arrived gray and cold. Helen drove us to the courthouse. The building loomed over the street like a stone giant, its steps slick with rain. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of dust and disinfectant. Daniel and Clara were already there, sitting beside their lawyer, Mr. Levine. Daniel wouldn't meet my eyes. Clara, on the other hand, smiled, thin, polished, poisonous. The judge, a woman in her 50s, took her seat. We're here to address the matter of Hayes versus Hayes, she began. Mr. Levine stood. Your Honor, we intend to prove that Mrs. Eleanor Hayes was unduly influenced in the establishment of her living trust, and that she lacks full mental competence. Helen rose smoothly. Objection, Your Honor. These are unfounded allegations. Mrs. Hayes is of sound mind, as demonstrated by her medical records and professional evaluations. The judge nodded. Proceed with evidence. One by one, they presented their claims, that I'd been confused about financial matters, that I'd shown signs of forgetfulness, that I'd acted under pressure. Each word chipped at something inside me, yet I didn't flinch. When it was my turn, I stood slowly. Helen handed me the statement we'd prepared, but I didn't read from it. Instead, I spoke from memory. I've lived in that house for 42 years, I began. I raised my son there. I buried my husband's ashes under the oak tree he planted. That home is not just wood and stone. It's every piece of life we built together. My son and his wife came to me asking for help. I offered them what I could. But when help became expectation, and expectation became demand, I drew a line. That's all this is, a line. The courtroom was silent. Even Clara looked away. I may be old, I continued, but I am not confused. I know exactly what I signed and why I signed it, I didn't do it out of fear. I did it out of love. For what's right, for what's left. And for the one person in my life who still looks at me without wanting something. I turned slightly toward Emily, who was sitting in the back row beside Helen's assistant. Her eyes glistened. The judge's expression softened. "Thank you, Mrs. Hayes," she said quietly. The rest of the hearing passed in fragments. Questions, objections, procedural chatter. But I already knew. Some things you can feel in the air before the gavel even falls. 2 weeks later, the decision came by mail. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope trembling in my hands. Emily watched silently as I tore it open. The court finds no sufficient evidence of coercion or incapacity. The trust remains valid. I exhaled, a sound halfway between relief and grief. Emily smiled faintly. "You won, Grandma." I nodded. "No, sweetheart. We just didn't lose." That evening, I walked through the garden alone. The roses were blooming early that year. I could almost hear Michael's laugh in the rustle of leaves. From the road, headlights flickered. A car slowed near the gate. Daniel's. He didn't come in. Just sat there for a moment before driving away. I whispered to the night, "Maybe someday, he'll understand." Then I turned back toward the house, my house, the windows glowing warm in the dark. For the first time in years, it felt like home again. The days after the verdict felt strangely hollow. There was no celebration, no champagne, no triumphant music swelling in the background. Just the same house, the same garden, the same quiet hum of life continuing. Winning in court doesn't fix what's already broken. It just stops the bleeding. Emily went back to school. She was brighter now, lighter somehow, laughing more, humming while she got ready. I'd catch her reflection in the hallway mirror sometimes, that same tilt of her smile I remembered from Daniel when he was her age. It hurt and healed me all at once. Helen came by to drop off the finalized papers. She placed them neatly on the table. "It's all over, Eleanor," she said. "Legally, no one can touch the trust now. You're protected." "Legally," I repeated with a faint smile. "The heart takes longer." Helen nodded. "You did what few people have the courage to do. You drew a boundary, and you kept it." I looked out the window at the garden, at the old oak tree that still stood tall after every storm. "Boundaries are easy on paper," I said. "Living with them is harder." That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet without conflict, like it had forgotten what to echo. I made myself tea and wandered through the hall. The photographs on the wall stared back at me. Daniel as a baby, his first bicycle, our family Christmas in '92. Memories frozen in frames. I stopped in front of one photo. Daniel at his wedding. He looked so proud that day, standing next to Clara, eyes full of hope. I whispered to the picture, "Where did we lose you?" The next morning, I found an envelope on the porch again. No lawyer's seal this time. Just a folded sheet of notebook paper, slightly smudged with rain. "Mom, I don't know how to start this. I said things I shouldn't have, and I let her push too hard. You were right. We were drowning, and I used you as the surface. I thought if I could hold on to your house, maybe I could still hold on to the life I lost. But I see now I was just taking from you what I hadn't earned. I'm sorry. Daniel." The words blurred a little as I read them, and for the first time in months I cried, not from anger, but from the kind of grief that feels like mercy. That evening, Emily came home from school and saw the letter on the table. "Dad wrote to you?" she asked carefully. I nodded. "Yes, he's trying." She sat down beside me. "Are you going to forgive him?" I looked at her, this child who had inherited the weight of her parents' mistakes. I already have, I said quietly. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give to someone else. It's what you do to stop carrying their sins in your own heart. Emily thought for a moment, then leaned her head against my arm. Can I still love them both? I smiled. That's the bravest thing you can do. The next few weeks moved gently. Spring rolled into early summer. The roses bloomed thick and wild. I began spending mornings writing letters. Not to send, just to remember. Letters to Michael, to my younger self, to the son who'd once built tree houses in our backyard. Then one afternoon, as I was trimming the hydrangeas, I heard the crunch of gravel at the gate. Daniel's car. He got out slowly, like a man unsure if he was welcome. He looked older, not in years, but in spirit. Guilt ages people faster than time ever could. "Mom," he said softly. I stood there with the pruning shears still in my hand. "You found your way back," I said. "I had to try," he said. "I've been driving by for days. Couldn't bring myself to stop." I gestured toward the porch. "Come sit." He followed me, sitting at the small table where Michael and I used to drink coffee on Sundays. The silence between us was heavy but not cruel. After a while, Daniel said, "I don't expect you to forget." "I don't," I said. "But I can remember with peace instead of pain." He nodded, looking down. "Clara and we're separating. She left last month, took what was left of the money and went to her sister's." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. He gave a sad smile. "No, Mom, don't be. I think losing her was the only way I could start finding myself again." We sat there quietly for a long time, the hum of cicadas filling the air. Then, almost hesitantly, he asked, "Can I come back here sometimes? Not to stay, just to be near it again?" I reached across the table, my hand covering his. "Daniel, you were never truly gone, just lost for a while." He looked up, eyes wet, and for the first time in years, I saw my son again. Not the man who had betrayed me, but the boy who once whispered secrets to the stars from his bedroom window. Emily came home that evening and froze at the sight of her father on the porch. "Dad?" Daniel stood, unsure whether to approach. "Hey, kiddo." Her voice trembled. "You came." He nodded. "Yeah, I came." And then, without waiting for permission, she ran to him. The hug was messy, clumsy, and full of everything words couldn't fix. I turned away, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. Later, when the sun dipped low and Daniel finally left, Emily and I stood in the garden together. Fireflies blinked between the rose bushes, and the air smelled like rain. She looked up at me. "Do you think he'll come back again?" "I think he will," I said, "when he's ready." She smiled. "You know, I think Grandpa would be proud of you." I looked toward the oak tree. The branches swayed gently in the wind, as if agreeing. That night, I sat at my writing desk and opened a fresh page in my journal. Some endings aren't loud. They don't crash or burn. They fade, softly, like dusk giving way to evening, leaving only what's real behind. I used to think strength meant holding on. Now I know it means letting go, and still choosing to love anyway. I closed the book, blew out the candle, and went to the window. The garden shimmered under the moonlight, alive, whole, and quietly waiting. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a place I was guarding. It felt like a home again. And somewhere beyond the stillness, I could almost hear Michael's voice, warm, steady, proud, whispering, "You did it, Ellie." The following weeks settled into a kind of gentle rhythm. The tension that had once filled the air like static was gone. The walls no longer echoed arguments or the sharp sound of doors closing too hard. The silence had softened, become companionable again. Every morning I woke before dawn. Old habits from my teaching years never really left me. I'd sit by the kitchen window with a cup of coffee, watching the world wake up. The robins came first, then the sun, creeping slowly across the fence line, spilling over the garden like honey. I had almost forgotten what peace felt like. Daniel called once a week. Sometimes we didn't talk about anything important, just the weather, his new job at a local repair shop, how Emily was doing in school. But every call built a fragile bridge, one word, one pause, one sigh at a time. One morning, as I was pruning the lilacs, Robert walked by with his usual slow, confident stride. He waved his gardening gloves at me. "You missed the community center meeting again, Ellie," he said, grinning. "I wasn't in the mood to discuss sidewalk repairs and bake sales," I replied, wiping my hands. "You used to love that kind of thing." "I used to love a lot of things," I said, half smiling. "Maybe I forgot how." He studied me for a moment, eyes kind but searching. "Maybe it's time you remembered." That afternoon, he came back carrying a basket of lemons from his tree. "For the pies," he said, leaving them on my porch. "We could use your recipe at the fundraiser next week." I laughed. "So this is how you trap old women into volunteering. Works every time," he said, and walked off whistling. The following week, I found myself standing behind the bake sale table at the community hall, wearing my old apron with faded sunflowers. Kids ran around with frosting on their cheeks. Someone played guitar in the corner. For the first time in months, I felt the hum of belonging. When Robert stopped by to sample a slice, he took one bite and closed his eyes. "Still perfect," he said. I rolled mine. "You're just saying that because you want another." He grinned. "Maybe. Or maybe because I've missed seeing you smile." His words hung in the air for a moment. Simple, unpretentious, but heavier than they seemed. That night, when I got home, I set the leftover pie on the counter and caught my reflection in the dark window. The woman staring back at me wasn't the same one who had once trembled at a daughter-in-law's cruelty. Her eyes were clearer now, steadier. I whispered softly, "You're still here." The next few days were busy. Meetings for the New Dawn Foundation, letters from other widows seeking help. One of them, a woman named Margaret, wrote that her son had convinced her to sign over her house and then locked her out. I invited her for tea. She sat in my kitchen, hands shaking around the mug. "I thought he loved me," she said. "I didn't want to make trouble." Her words cut deep. They were echoes of my own once-buried fears. I reached across the table, touched her hand gently. "You didn't make trouble, dear. You found your voice. That's bravery." Later, when she left, I called Gabriella. "Let's expand the foundation," I said. "There are too many women like Margaret. We can't save everyone, but we can try." Gabriella smiled through the phone. Now that's the Eleanor I know. Days turned into weeks. Spring melted into summer again. Emily spent more time with me after school. We'd cook together, tend to the roses, or sit under the oak tree reading. Sometimes she'd talk about her father, cautiously, testing how much the air could hold. "I think he's really trying, Grandma," she said one evening, watching fireflies blink through the dusk. "I think so too," I said. "And that's enough for now." She was quiet for a while, then asked, "Do you ever get lonely?" I looked up at the fading sky. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But loneliness isn't the same as being alone. One is an ache, the other is peace." She nodded thoughtfully as if she understood. Maybe she did. A few days later, Robert invited me to a small concert at the park. Local musicians, picnic blankets, lemonade stands. "Come on, Ellie," he said. "You can't hide in that garden forever." I almost said no. Then I thought of how I'd once stopped living long before I realized it. So I went. The air that evening was golden, full of laughter and the soft murmur of violins. I sat on a blanket beside Robert, the grass cool beneath us. When the sun slipped below the horizon, he leaned closer. "Do you ever think about what's next?" he asked quietly. "At my age," I said with a little laugh, "next usually means tea and bed." He smiled but didn't look away. "That's not what I meant." I met his gaze, the honesty in it both comforting and terrifying. "I think," I said slowly, "for the first time, I'm not afraid to find out." We sat there until the lights dimmed and the crickets took over the music. Later, as I walked home, the streets glowed softly under the street lamps. I thought of Michael, his laugh, his steady hands, his kindness. I would always miss him, but maybe grief had done its work. It had carved space for something new to grow. When I reached my porch, I saw another envelope waiting on the step. It was from Daniel again, shorter this time. "Mom." I saw Emily's photos at the park. "You looked happy. I'm glad. I want to visit this weekend if you'll have me. D." I smiled. For years I had prayed for this, not the visit, but the healing beneath it. Saturday came warm and breezy. Daniel arrived early carrying a small box. "What's that?" I asked. He smiled awkwardly. "A few of Dad's things. I thought maybe they belonged here." Inside were Michael's old cufflinks, his watch, a worn notebook. I touched each one gently, the way you touch something sacred. "Thank you," I said. We spent the day fixing the fence, sharing stories, laughing softly about old times. When Emily joined us, she took a picture. The three of us in the garden, sunlight spilling across our faces. That evening, after they left, I sat on the porch steps with a cup of tea. Robert waved from across the street, and I waved back. The sky above was streaked in pink and gold, the kind of beauty that hurts a little because it doesn't last. I thought of everything. The betrayal, the lawsuit, the tears, the rediscovered laughter, and realized that life doesn't return to what it was. It becomes something else entirely. Something smaller, maybe, but purer. Inside, the phone rang. It was Helen from the Foundation. "Eleanor, Channel 9 wants to do a segment on the new Dawn program," she said excitedly. "They want to feature your story." I hesitated. "My story?" "Yes. How one woman turned loss into protection for others. It's inspiring." I looked at the house around me, the walls that had seen every version of me, and smiled faintly. "All right," I said, "but only if it helps someone find their own dawn." After she hung up, I whispered to the empty room, "Looks like we're not done yet, Michael." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint sound of laughter from a neighbor's yard. For the first time in a very long time, I felt not just safe, but alive. The morning of the interview felt strangely calm. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen curtains, warm and golden, the kind that softens everything it touches. I had baked lemon scones, a small ritual of comfort before something new. Gabriella arrived first, her arms full of papers. "They'll be here in an hour," she said, glancing around. "You ready?" I smiled faintly. "Do I have a choice?" "Of course not," she grinned. "You're the face of hope now, remember?" I laughed softly, shaking my head. "I'm just an old woman who got tired of being quiet." She reached out, squeezing my shoulder. "That's exactly why they need to hear you." When the camera crew arrived, the house felt smaller somehow. Cables on the floor, the soft buzz of lights, the smell of makeup powder. The young journalist, polite, bright-eyed, maybe 25, set her recorder on the coffee table. "Mrs. Hart," she began, "you started the New Dawn Foundation just 1 year ago. Today it's helped more than 300 women across the state. How does that feel?" I thought for a moment before answering. It feels like light after a long night. Not because I did something extraordinary, but because I finally stopped pretending darkness was normal. She smiled. "And you've shared your own story publicly. That must have taken courage." "Courage," I said softly, "isn't loud. Sometimes it's just the moment you decide not to be afraid anymore." As the interview went on, I saw flashes of my old life reflected back at me, not as tragedy, but as testimony. I spoke of mistakes, forgiveness, and how healing doesn't mean erasing pain. It means carrying it differently. When the lights turned off and the crew packed up, the young reporter lingered. "Mrs. Hart," she said shyly, "my mother went through something similar. She never talks about it. But maybe she will now." I felt a lump in my throat. "Tell her she's not alone," I said. "None of us ever really are." After they left, the silence of the house felt sacred, not empty, but earned. A week later, the segment aired. It wasn't flashy, just a quiet story of resilience, but somehow, it caught fire. The network uploaded it online. Within days, thousands of messages flooded in. Letters, emails, calls. Women from small towns, cities, even other countries wrote, "You told my story, Eleanor. Your courage gave me the strength to leave. Thank you for reminding me I'm still human." Gabriella printed some of them and pinned them on a board at the foundation office. I visited that afternoon, reading the words in stunned silence. "Do you realize what you've done?" she asked, her eyes shining. "You gave a voice to all of us." I shook my head, smiling softly. "I just spoke the truth. The world did the rest, but not everyone celebrated." 3 days later, I received a letter in an unfamiliar handwriting, no return address. Just 5 words on the envelope. "You don't deserve forgiveness." Inside was a single line. "Some wounds shouldn't be televised." My hands trembled slightly as I folded the paper back. For a moment, old shadows stirred, and guilt, doubt, fear, but only for a moment. Then I took a deep breath and placed the letter in a drawer. That evening, Robert stopped by with tea. "You look troubled," he said. "Something happen?" I handed him the letter. He read it quietly, then set it down. "Someone's hurting," he said. "And they want you to hurt too." I thought I was past that, I admitted. "You are," he said gently. "But the world doesn't forget as quickly as we do. That's why stories like yours matter." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind in the trees. Then he said softly, "Don't let ghosts silence you, Ellie. They already had their turn." His words lingered long after he left. The next morning, I found myself at the foundation early. The office was quiet, sunlight spilling across the wooden floors, dust dancing in the light. Margaret was there too, sorting donation boxes. "Did you see the news?" she asked, excited. "They're talking about expanding New Dawn to other states." I smiled. "That's wonderful." She hesitated. "But are you okay? You seem distant." I sighed, just thinking about how far we've come, and how far we still have to go. She nodded slowly. "You taught us something, you know, that even broken wings can carry others." That night, as I sat reading in the living room, the doorbell rang. It was Daniel. "Mom," he said breathlessly. "I saw the interview." "You were incredible," I laughed. "I looked like I was holding back a sneeze the whole time." He smiled, stepping inside. "No, you looked like someone finally free." He hesitated then. "There's something else." He pulled a small envelope from his pocket. "It's from Sarah." The name still stung. His ex-wife, the one who had once turned our home into a battlefield. I took the envelope, unsure. Inside was a short note. "Eleanor, I watched your interview. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know. I've changed. I see now what I destroyed. I'm sorry." I stared at the words for a long time, not out of anger, but out of disbelief. Daniel watched quietly. "I didn't know she'd write," he said softly, "but I thought you should read it." I folded the note and set it on the table. "Thank you, Daniel." He looked uncertain. "Do you believe her?" I looked toward the window, where dusk was beginning to fall. Soft, forgiving. I believe people can break, I said slowly. And sometimes, if they're lucky, they can build again. But forgiveness isn't about them. It's about setting yourself free. He nodded. You really mean that? Yes, I said, smiling faintly. Because for the first time I do forgive her. Not for what she did, but so I can stop carrying it. That night, I sat outside under the stars, the cool air wrapping around me like an old friend. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, faint, gentle like a heartbeat. Robert joined me quietly, 2 cups of cocoa in hand. Long day? He asked. Long life, I said, smiling. He chuckled softly. I'm glad you're still in it. I looked at him then, really looked, and saw not just the neighbor who'd been kind when the world turned cruel, but a man who'd waited patiently for light to return to my eyes. Robert, I said after a long pause, what's next isn't about starting over but continuing together? He smiled, eyes warm. Then I'd say it's about time. We sat in silence, watching the night deepen. The next morning I visited the garden, my quiet sanctuary. Dew clung to the roses, each petal catching light like glass. I could almost hear Michael's voice in the breeze. You did good, Ellie. Tears came, soft and unhurried. For the first time, they didn't feel like grief. They felt like gratitude. The air carried the first scent of autumn, that quiet crispness before the leaves decide to let go. It had been 3 years since the interview, 3 years since my life stopped being defined by what was taken and began to be defined by what was rebuilt. The New Dawn Foundation had grown beyond anything I'd ever imagined. Offices in 5 states now, partnerships with shelters, lawyers, and educators. Last month, they'd asked me to deliver a keynote speech at the Women of Courage Summit in New York. I said no at first. Public stages were never my dream. Gardens were. But Gabriella insisted. It's your story, Eleanor. You owe it to the women who are still silent. And maybe she was right. That morning, as the driver pulled up in front of the old house, I paused by the gate, the same one that had once symbolized confinement. Now it was just wood and metal. I locked it gently and whispered, "Keep it safe." The drive to the airport was long and quiet. The city outside my window moved fast, people rushing, horns blaring, life refusing to pause. But inside the car, time felt slow, deliberate. When the plane lifted off, I looked down at the patchwork of land shrinking below. There was something humbling about it. How small everything looked once you rose above it. In New York, the air was sharper, restless. The hotel room overlooked the skyline, tall glass towers, blinking lights, the hum of ambition. I stood there a long time, thinking of Michael. He would have teased me. Eleanor Hart, on a billboard? Who would have guessed? I smiled softly. Not me, I whispered. The next morning, the hall was already buzzing. Hundreds of women filled the seats. Survivors, activists, leaders. Some had my book in their hands, The Quiet Fight. I'd written it with trembling fingers the year after the interview, never expecting it to reach beyond my town. When my name was announced, I stepped onto the stage, the lights warm on my face. The applause felt like a tide, not overwhelming, but steady, kind. I looked out at the sea of faces, each carrying a story I'd never know, each one proof that survival wasn't just possible. It was contagious. Good morning, I began softly. When I first learned what silence could destroy, I thought my life was ending. But now I understand it was beginning. Sometimes we have to break to be rebuilt honestly. I told them about fear, about small acts of defiance, about the first night I dared to sleep without guilt. I told them how forgiveness wasn't a door we open for others. It's the key that frees us from ourselves. And as I spoke, I realized something I hadn't before. I wasn't telling a story anymore. I was closing one. When I finished, The room stood, hundreds of hands clapping, some eyes wet, some smiling. I bowed my head, humbled. Afterward, as the crowd thinned, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 22. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "Mrs. Hart," she said, "I came here from Kenya. My mother, she saw your video years ago. She started a shelter there because of you." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "She told me," the girl continued, voice shaking, "to give you this." She handed me a small bracelet, simple woven thread, blue and gold. She said it's a piece of hope, carried across oceans. I closed my fingers around it, my throat tight. "Tell your mother," I whispered, "that hope travels both ways." That night, I returned to my hotel and placed the bracelet beside my wedding ring on the nightstand. 2 different symbols, one of love lost, the other of love continued. When I came home a week later, the garden had begun to change. Leaves scattered the grass in gold and amber. Robert was there, kneeling by the fence, replacing the old wood panel that had been loose since summer. "Welcome home, Ellie," he said, standing, wiping his hands. "Thank you," I said softly. "The place looks beautiful. Not as beautiful as New York, I imagine." I smiled. "New York has lights, but this..." I gestured to the fading roses, the quiet sky. "This has peace." He looked at me for a long moment. "And you have both now." We sat on the porch that evening, sharing tea, the air thick with that gentle melancholy that comes when endings approach. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. I looked at him, eyes glistening. "You should be proud of yourself too. You helped me remember life after loss." He smiled faintly. "Then we're even." The next day, Emily visited. She was taller now, her voice deeper, her confidence unshakable. She'd been accepted into a university program for social work. "I want to help people, Grandma," she said, excitement lighting her face. "Like you did." My chest ached with a quiet joy. "Then promise me one thing," I said. "Help them without losing yourself." She nodded seriously. "I will." Before leaving, she hugged me tighter than she ever had before. "Dad says you changed everything," she whispered. I smiled through tears. "No, darling. We all did." That evening, the sky turned a color words couldn't quite name, half gold, half gray. I took my cup of tea and walked into the garden. The air smelled like endings and beginnings at once. Robert joined me, his steps familiar. "Do you ever think about the past?" he asked. "Sometimes," I said, eyes on the horizon. "But not to relive it, to remember how far I've come." He nodded. "And the future?" I smiled softly. "It's not something I chase anymore. It'll find me, just like peace did." We sat quietly, watching the last light fade. Somewhere, a wind chime whispered its tune. Inside the house, the phone buzzed. A message from Gabriella. "Eleanor, your speech reached over 10 million views in a week. People are calling it the quiet revolution." I stared at the message, smiling faintly. Not because of the number, but because of what it meant. That silence was finally breaking, one voice at a time. I walked back inside, placed the phone on the table, and turned off the lights. The room filled with twilight. On the wall hung a framed photo. Me, Daniel, and Emily in the garden, sunlight washing over us. Next to it, another, Robert and I, laughing beside the foundation's ribbon-cutting banner. Life had found me again, quietly, naturally, without noise. Picked up Michael's old notebook from the shelf, the one he used to jot down thoughts and poetry. Flipping through, I found a line written years ago. "Love doesn't end when life changes. It simply learns a new way to stay." Tears came again, but they were warm this time. I whispered to the air, "You were right, Michael." It stayed. Outside, the moon rose slow and silver, bathing the garden in gentle light. The roses swayed in the breeze, fragile yet defiant, like every woman who had ever learned to bloom again after being broken. I closed my eyes, breathing in the scent of earth and memory, and for the first time, I realized the story wasn't about loss. It was about return. Return to self. Return to peace. Return to life. And somewhere, deep inside the night, I could almost hear the soft echo of his voice. Proud, amused, full of love. "Welcome home, Ellie." I smiled through the tears, whispering back, "Yes, home.